Welcome to the very last part of a critique of Yooka Laylee, in which we'll be looking into several of the game's features that I arbitrarily decided weren't important enough to pop into other sections, so let's get stuck into another controversial topic for the game, the arcade. As I said previously, the game will give you the opportunity to break it up and play some mini-games. This provides a sense of pacing and a different form of gameplay aside from the main world. Let me be clear, this is straight from Rextro himself. These games are not meant to have retro graphics, they're meant to have retro mechanics. What are retro mechanics? A bird's eye view of a racing track, beating the high score arcade style, blocky hitboxes that don't match the models, one speed on movement that is very limited in terms of controls, very few actions. It is frustrating to me that you're required to beat these bloody things twice. It isn't enough that you complete the game, but you have to beat his high score as well. I can see that being a worthy reason to give a player 2 pages, but my goodness, just give me both of them if I pull off that kind of feat first time. Which a surprisingly large amount of players actually do, by the way. It isn't too difficult to beat the high score first time in these games, but honestly, if players pull this off, reward them with a double pagey. That would be pretty awesome. So anyway, we have a selection of these mini-games that are unlocked throughout the worlds of the game, one per world and a couple of extra ones for multiplayer. First up is Karto's Karting. The controls for this are straightforward, despite being a little confusing, and the challenge is mostly reasonable. Complete 5 laps of a course while staying on the track with the option to collect power-ups and avoid slowdowns, as well as the environmental challenges. This is extremely arcadey in feel, and probably the strongest of the arcade games, but it's still something you come away from not really wanting to play again. Glaciators. This game is far more focused on simple movement. The control is the same as the main game, yet the platforms move up and down at different times. You have to evade enemies and collect the quills with different colors representing different amounts of points. It is once again a very arcade experience that feels like a Mario Party game and ends up once again being something you wouldn't really want to play again. Bebop. This game controls like Joust, in which you need to be above the opponents, but they are restricted to their platforms and you have to slam down on them while avoiding fire hazards. You can also pick up speed boosts and invincibility. This one is very simple and easy, but being played twice outstays its welcome. Hurdle Hijinks. This game marks the terrible arcade games. It controls very clunkily. You essentially teleport to each part of the track almost immediately, which is very off-putting to try and follow. The camera will eventually catch up to you and kill you, so you must use speed up. However, if you stray too far forward, your jumps become less effective and the camera increases speed. This means you are punished if you don't maintain a particular length away from the camera at the right times. There is clearly a very obvious rubber banding sequence going on here. If you die by hitting one of the obstacles, then the game will spawn you very awkwardly and very often unfairly, leading to another death, thus taking many points away from my score. The jump that you perform when you're very far ahead doesn't push you as far forward as when the camera is closer, and this can easily result in tripping over the barricades. This arcade game is really bad, and makes for some incredibly frustrating moments to try and obtain those 2 pages. With all of the things that I just mentioned, you can even have the background, showing a rooftop over the map itself, getting completely in my way and potentially resulting in a loss. So what I'm trying to tell you is, you have all of these little events that make playing the game really annoying, but the bonus ability of these annoying events is that they will force you to lose your score and ultimately have you play the game again and again and again until you actually beat it. These mechanics are so frustratively clunky that I really had a hard time trying to talk about the positives of the arcade after this one. Upper Nova. You move up, down, forward and back while hitting A to boost, move through the level and avoid the hazards while collecting the quills. This game is extremely clunky and runs worse than Flappy Bird. That's a rough statement to make, but it is actually true. Aside from the horrifyingly bad hitboxes, they have extremely awkward placements for you upon respawning, similarly to the previous arcade game. It runs for far too long and really starts to wear thin by the later minutes of gameplay. When you take a hit, it lets loose a whole bunch of collectibles, but half of them go into the block that killed you, thus making it impossible to collect them all back without losing another hit. So you may find that not going for them is the clear option, but you lose 6k points when the high score is 14k. And trying to go for them again can result in you losing even more points. But while this is going on, you're losing health as well. You can only be hit a certain amount of times before you're forced out of the game. The challenge isn't necessarily collecting the feathers, it is avoiding the land that is harmful, since if that was all you were focusing on, you would likely end up with the quills you needed anyway. You can sometimes take a double hit by slamming into the walls, and that fucking sucks to have happen to you. It is incredibly disjointing to deal with, and you'll find that you can get fully tilted from even one of those experiences, leading you to even more deaths. The arcade as a whole is neat, but I hope it didn't take too much of their time overall, because it is seriously not that great. These games were about the thing you would expect on Mario Party, but a kind of a bad Mario Party game. But hey, the fact that you don't want to play them again isn't indicative of a bad game, since there are plenty of sections to this game in general that I wouldn't necessarily want to replay right away. Even if they were offered an additional pagey, it is simply unfortunate that you essentially have to if you want to get that 100%. On top of all that, there are a handful of more arcade games that aren't something I have tried playing with friends, but they are clearly aside from the solo gameplay. They don't add to totals, and they seem to be almost entirely for co-op. Ultimately, the arcade is little more than a minor distraction that gives a new and potentially interesting set of levels a little place for them to shine, when in reality, they are just little puzzles that are mostly extended for too much time and force you to play them twice, which is probably what is earning them so much hatred. I found the first 3 levels quite serviceable, they didn't really bother me. The last 2 were pretty much just a terrible experience to play consistently. Though through each of my playthroughs, I still appreciate that they came from adding them on as part of the stretch goals, and I think they definitely do help pace out certain parts of the game. But it pissed off a lot of people, and I can definitely see why. Though honestly, if we had 5 of them being the quality of the first 3, I would be sitting here telling you I don't understand why everyone's so angry. But I guess you guys can make of that what you will. Next up is Kartos and his wonderful minecart rides.
There's a minecart course in each world, but I gotta tell you, I did not like these. They controlled terribly, felt unfair, and overall just weren't fun.
So how does this work? A to jump, X to fire, forward to speed up, backward to slow down, jump and speed up to do a large arc, jump and slow down to do a pausing jump. You need to collect a certain amount of gems per world's track, and they range from 75 to 175. You get 5 points for collecting yellow gems, you get 1 point for collecting blue gems. You will lose 3 points for taking damage, you'll be immune to damage for a couple of seconds upon taking damage. There will be moments offered to you to snap onto the track as long as you are within a certain range. Those are the rules. World 1 is pretty straightforward. You get the introduction of all the mechanics involved, and most players will get the required amount of gems on their first try. World 2 begins to add a lot of harder to reach bonuses that encourage a greater understanding of the mechanics, and players will begin to have difficulty completing the track. World 3 introduces multiple track options that change the entire track based on what you decide will be the easiest road, or you can gamble to go for the more difficult ones that yield bigger rewards. If players realize how you can manipulate the track, then they will not struggle to reach the required amount of gems. World 4 cranks the difficulty. At this point it is required to get 150 gems, and there are a lot of modifiers that require a more solid understanding of the mechanics, and there is a significant increase in the amount of opportunity for death. World 5 is essentially the same level of difficulty as World 4, and increases the opportunities for the amount of rewarding difficult jumps. But this last track has a modifier of gravity, being far less as you are in space and shit. This has a profound effect on the jumping mechanics that change a lot in terms of what decisions you need to make. Now, there is a lot of cool shit to Kartos. The fact that you are essentially driven around the entire map retrospective to whichever world you're in is pretty cool. The fact that it is an essentially completely different form of gameplay that's faster paced and optional to the main exploration of the game is pretty cool. But the thing that people are having the most rough time with is that the games themselves are very much tight. It isn't a janky or unresponsive control because you ask things of Kartos and he will fucking do them. No, the issue is that this thing can be very difficult and unforgiving. The reason I know it is tight is because after failing miserably on World 4 several times, I started to take the cooldowns and controls very seriously. You can't simply speed up and slow down at will. You get to use one or the other once per about 4 seconds. Knowing that, and knowing where you'll end up based on using the jump in junction with the speed up and slow down, this track becomes a series of precise timings based on your own reaction time. They even have multiple choice tracks that'll change in terms of difficulty and opportunity for gems. Yes, it can be frustrating and glitches can occur. Ultimately though, people are simply getting frustrated with how it works. I know this because I beat the 5th world the first time, and I wanted an even more complicated track to work with. Now that I've read people's responses to this feature online and seen some videos, I now understand that Playtonic are either being criticized for making it too difficult, or for not making it control easier. To which I say, get good. My point here is that is how the mechanics work with this section. You will be punished if you do not take your limits seriously. Not all the challenges in this game are simple and easy. As I've gone over previously, some of the challenges are actually rather difficult. I don't think people were prepared for that. Like, they're approaching several easy challenges, then suddenly something that is slapping them into the ground in terms of having them understand a particular set of rules and punishing them in terms of a restart. Having to deal with that when you are previously just pushing a button can be jarring, but it's very much its own thing. I don't think Katos really had a chance of being respected, since if it didn't have the mechanics at hand, it would have been looked at as too easy and ultimately pointless. Meanwhile, adding these challenges and decisions have made people think it's poorly constructed. I had a really good time beating Katos, and about 95% of my deaths were easily attributable to bad decision making on my part. But I actually became pretty decent at these sections, and it's a shame that people only spent what is probably about 1 or 2 attempts at each world and decided that because they couldn't make it work, it's poorly made. I am a huge defender of Katos. I don't know how you guys are going to respond to this. I really have no idea if anybody else agrees with me on Katos, because honestly, everybody's been criticizing the shit out of him in reviews. But this is my honest assessment after playing each of the worlds several times to completion. It works. And when you start winning in the Katos rides, when you start nailing those jumps, it is really satisfying. Now, since I briefly touched on the whole possibility for glitches, I need to be transparent in that there were several glitches in this game, ones that cannot be ignored but didn't break the game in any kind of fundamental way. But there are also just really weird things happening. Here's a compact list of said things. Now, they may fix this in upcoming updates. In fact, this list could be useful for them to find what needs to be fixed. I really have no idea. But the point here is that a lot of people have been saying the game feels unfinished or it needs polish or the spit and polish thing, which, you know, it bothers me because nobody qualifies it. They just say it needs polish, while I'm gonna say that these things need polish. When you end up near certain walls, Yooka sort of just starts to phase out of our universe. This can happen even when you're just on the ground. You got some weird textures that not only look kind of shitty sometimes, but also lap over each other and are a little poopy to look at. Even the health bar will randomly decide that it needs to be displayed over more important menus, but then remember its place. Hedges and bushes and junk will literally vibrate when you enter them for some fucking reason. Things don't always feel quite right. You'll have moments where you think one thing will happen, but then not so much. It's hard to explain, but I like charged forward and landed on a block, and it felt as though I got stuck, almost like the game is non-reactive in terms of physics every once in a while. And then there's the whole walking through certain objects, or how jumping up things will often just look weird as fuck. Like, there's this weird shit where sometimes enemies do stuff that comes across as badly constructed. For instance, when you break igloos with the buddy slam, you can end up being hit by what spawns inside, which is just annoying. How about when enemies run on the spot during cutscenes? Or how sometimes their attacks will simply hit the ceiling they are currently near to. All of this is a little bit weird, but there's more. When you exit particular areas, you can end up being hit upon regaining your character after they've left their scripted walking animation. That's no good. And hitboxes are far from perfect in this game. Stuff just stops you and you feel like you've more than made it. Then again, it could just be more instances of invisible walls, right? We all love those. I literally broke the pinball machine in Capital Casino, and to get it working I had to leave and come back. The sliding physics often result in you infinitely falling. Some of the spawns for objects in this world don't quite make it in properly sometimes, and that can be quite confusing. Not to mention certain lighting issues can occur in certain places when you look in certain ways, which can be really distracting. Oh, and there's this whole grappling ability sort of completely fucking up sometimes too. I guess more egregious glitches would be the ones where enemies get stuck in the ground, or when they climb walls, or maybe when they just fly in general, which is pretty fucking terrifying. Though probably the most frustrating glitch in the game for me personally was this fabulous incident. Combine the inability to understand the new mechanic that they didn't teach me with the knowledge that there are some things I cannot do in this game because I need to unlock future moves, with the uncertainty of what is happening in this room, and you get me spending a significant amount of time wondering just how I fucked up. But I just want to emphasize, I literally tried everything you could think of, and it turns out it was glitched, and I had to reload, and that was sad. Though for the most part, none of these are repeatable in any meaningful way, and they all are very fixable. The last glitch is the only one that bothered me because the rest were mostly funny or completely harmless. Oh, and everyone has been including licking the ghost in the mouth with your tongue in their videos, so I figure I just would throw it in somewhere. Seriously, people it's just everywhere. There it is. Now that all the glitches are out of the way, I want to have a few nitpicks. Just a few things that bother me in a row. I mean, you have come this far, and if you want to fight to the conclusion of this video, I will force you to listen to the almost pointless issues I have with this game. I demand it. even though you could just skip in the time. The page you meet in the opening room of Hivory Towers tells you that he's gone into hiding along with the rest of the pages, even though he's at the top of Capital B's statue. This is blatantly a retarded place to hide. Why would the butterflies be so happy about being eaten by the main characters? It's horrifying. A pagey and a cagey, a mazy. Fuck it. Why is there a pagey and a fucking cagey anyway? We know that Capital B wants them all in his book. Why is he locking them up and placing them down for me to find? Capital B is trying to fill his book, and he won't allow you to see him until you steal 100 of his pages, many of which are in cages that he's set up. I mean, sure, some characters have these things because they found them, but I don't know, this is a really bad plan, Capital B. After you get the pagey from the cloud, it pops right out of his ass into you. I'm terrified, and I don't understand why this is happening, and there was no consent, and I just... How is it that Dr. Quack stole all of Dr. Puzz's research and has nothing but a book stealer to show for it? Is that something she was building? Did he do anything interesting with any of the other technology and research? Maybe that'll be in a sequel. Who blocked the aristocrats' windows, and why? And how? And what did they do this for? Why does Laylee go invisible with Yooka? The ability should be restricted to the lizard if it's based on camouflage, surely. Why would Capital B exchange his pages for tokens when first of all he wants pages more than anything to take over the world? And secondly, is this what he's been giving to other people who win tokens in his casino? Fucking pages? Why would he do that? Capital B, what are you doing? It bothers me that you can take damage even after you've passed the finish line in the karting games. I don't know if it makes any difference, but since the music for whether you passed plays immediately on the finish line, I'm sure it doesn't affect anything, but come on, it is silly. During the boss fight with Inept, you can actually shoot cannonballs that'll go right through him because they count as being fired from an angle you're returning to the track on. It's annoying, but it's not easy to pull off, and I guess I have to be honest and say that this is something that could happen in any part of the track games. So yeah, kind of annoying, but whatever. The pigs literally hire you as a taxi service, yet they will make you restart if you miss out on their timer by like even 1 second. Like the idea that they make you drive to A, but you get them 99% of the way not fast enough, quote unquote. So you have to drive them back and then all the way back again. Like, what the fuck, pigs? If you actually wanted a taxi, nobody in real life would ever treat it this way. Yooka and Laylee destroy the space station or weapon, whatever, while inside it, and yet they emerge just fine. Why aren't you dead? How does this ice cube stay frozen when it's surrounded by a wall of fire? They only ever have a selection of about 4 to 5 letters in each area that you see letters flying or melting in the acid, and this makes me sad. See right here, it's just A, B, C, D, and E. There's nothing else. At one point I couldn't leave the world I was in for a minute or so, and it annoyed me. A butterfly spawned outside of the glass wall where I killed an enemy, and it meant I couldn't swallow it for a health restore. This made me sad. What's with the series of mushrooms? They seem to just go nowhere. I mean, it must be that they sink, or that's just the challenge. I don't know, it's weird. At the point of hitting one of the walls in the maze near Ollie, you can find yourself watching yourself die for ages. You keep your power-ups even after death. It's fucking strange. I feel like I've done more than the game could possibly want for a game tester, and all I had to do was play it a whole bunch of times. What is it with game devs not being made aware of some of the things that are very easy to fix and, you know, highly specific issues? Is it like they are aware of them but they can't fix them? Or maybe that the game testers highlight all these things and they just ignore them? I don't know. I really have no idea, but ultimately all the glitches and nitpicks combined didn't really bother me overall because they didn't affect the game in any real way aside from the pagey that glitched up. And with that covered, that's pretty much everything the game has to offer and its pros and cons, and so we are truly left with conclusions and opinions, so let's do this thing. This game took me about 20 hours to complete and 24 hours to 100%, with it getting faster on subsequent playthroughs. There aren't enough rewards or recognition for a game like this when you hit that 100%, and I hope they rectify that in updates. Time spent is mostly of engagement with the game. There are moments of highs and lows and satisfaction and frustration. It plays like any game should. But before we really get stuck into the end, let's check out some of the remaining criticisms of the game.
It basically remade Banjo-Kazooie with new characters.
Hey, it's not 1998 anymore. We need something different.
Most people won't care about some of the more outdated elements that linger in this nostalgic trip down memory lane.
Do we really want an outdated 3D platformer like Banjo-Kazooie to simply be remade with different characters in the year 2017?
Playtonic have dragged almost kicking and screaming out of the 1990s without due reason, other than, hey, remember that? We'll do that again.
Yooka Laylee suffers from almost all of the same problems found in platformers from the late 1990s.
A game that doesn't pay homage to the past, it replicates it. in ways that it really shouldn't.
The fact that 3D platformers have been dead for about a decade, if not more.
The fact that Yooka Laylee relies so heavily on its predecessors ends up being one of the biggest problems.
Despite the great graphics, this feels a lot like a game that would have come out a couple of decades ago.
It's definitely trying to be a tribute to platformers of old.
Yooka Laylee is a game out of time, both in terms of its development cycle and its mechanics.
Yooka Laylee would fit right into the 90s, but the time has moved on since the N64 era.
A lot of people yearn for a return to simpler times, but there's a reason why 3D platformers moved away from focusing entirely on collecting items.
Even then, though, it still has the problem of being a very outdated formula.
Aside from the high-definition graphics, though, Yooka Laylee is literally a 90s game.
I'm very sorry, but a lot of you retards do not understand what outdated means. Genres do not get outdated, as I said previously. Mechanics are very rarely outdated. Same for features. Certainly not these days. I touched on it before with the jump in Castlevania. The mechanic was jump, and it was developed and changed to be something that people either preferred or didn't prefer, but people still enjoy playing that game from start to finish now, including me. Controllers get updated and given better reception, but once again, that's not really a mechanic at all. The process of jumping from platform to platform will not get outdated because it is simply a genre people enjoy or don't enjoy. It's simply the conclusion that the genre is either well realized or realized terribly. Not that it's outdated. First-person shooters will not be outdated, even if they're on a strong decline, because it is about how you innovate with the tools, not how long it lasts before it's outdated. What the fuck does that even mean as a criticism, when the whole point of a game was to create a throwback to a game from 1998? Did it achieve what it wanted if it was truly outdated? What does outdated convey to your audience anyway? Most of the reviewers just spit that out as a criticism without qualifying it in any sense. Are you saying the controls lack nuance and versatility? Are the graphics low res? Was the saving system requiring you to purchase a memory card? Have you noticed that none of these things pertain to jumping and climbing mechanics? Could it be that people think that you can really only jump and move and that's outdated? Well, fuck off. No, it's not, because Super Meat Boy is a thing. God damn, reviewers on YouTube just suck. I never know what they're even trying to say, and most of the time they only portray events in the game to assist the narrative they're running. In the case of outdated, I have never had anything visual or verbal to work with. If you guys actually genuinely feel that the game is outdated and you have something maybe a bit more substantial to add to the conversation, I will happily respond to you in the comments, as I pretty much try to do that with most people's comments. But before I rant too much, let me get my final slate across the screen, because this, folks, is the conclusion. So let us first be a little fairer to these sets of reviewers I have come to loathe, and give them the spotlight for the moment. This little montage is going to show you just how much you are thrown meaningless buzzwords and expected to try and take their own experience and feelings, lie or not, as gospel, because trust them. That's how it goes, and it's annoying as fuck, but don't take it from me. Enjoy.
I'll start with my biggest complaint about the game, is just how uninspired everything feels.
Lazy design in regards to the character and collectible placement.
And it's not insanely difficult, but it's definitely annoying.
Many of the punchlines are too obvious.
Some just may find it a little bit of an uninspired experience.
It all just feels rushed and forced. It doesn't feel natural, and it doesn't feel as confident as Banjo-Kazooie.
I mean, overall, the game feels a little bit rushed, like it needed another year to really put the spit and polish on it.
It's uninteresting levels, uninteresting characters. You're just going to be more bored and frustrated than you are going to be having fun.
Yooka Laylee is uninspired and wildly uneven.
Very samey.
Not every pagey is fun to get.
Other times it's just some generic music playing that's easily forgetful.
The few worlds that try to achieve a greater level of depth mostly fail to get it right.
And whilst Capital B is slightly disappointing, his overall design is fantastic, and he's still great in cutscenes. Again, just not as fun as Gruntilda was.
Half-hearted, buggy filler and missed opportunity.
But is it an absolutely horrible game? No, I wouldn't even say it's a bad game. I just wouldn't say it's a good game. It is a game.
The advanced moves aren't very original or innovative either.
The levels were also pretty bland for the most part. There were some good levels in there, of course, but a lot of them were just so boring to play through and just tedious to get through.
It'll always range from boring to downright frustrating,
delivering a dull and uninspired effort.
The game has a serious lack of direction.
Many of the NPC and enemy designs are also rather uninspired.
Characters also aren't very likable or interesting except for this snake.
This game doesn't really update the formula in any way, it just kind of recreates it. This plays more like a remake rather than a sequel.
I would say that the last boss is the only one that felt like a halfway decent 3D platformer boss. The rest of them just weren't very fun, and the first two in particular were really tedious.
I mean, the main menu is not passable in my opinion.
And I'm not gonna lie, much of this level does seem a tad aimless.
Some people probably wanted the Ratchet & Clank treatment. I think Ratchet & Clank, the remake from last year, they modernized it in absolutely every respect. They made it look incredible and made it work for a modern audience. They haven't done that with with Yooka Laylee. They've just made an old game look a bit nicer, and that's.
The game really just doesn't seem finished.
Capital B is not an imposing or compelling villain, and he could be removed from the story and it wouldn't affect it one bit.
This conception of the medium's history then fails to understand that games like Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie were a groundwork to build upon rather than the apex of platforming.
This game just doesn't feel fun to play.
I think the game is unnecessarily bloated.
This title is so riddled with glitches that it might realistically hurt the chances of future Kickstarter projects, which really, when you think about it, is kind of sad.
It's just unfinished, and it's unfun.
Uninspired.
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 Uninspired. Uninspired.
Uninspired.
The longer you play it, the more it kind of wanes and the more it struggles to ever live up to that potential that it sets out for itself within the first couple of minutes.
What a load of... Ugh. This is what's passing for like insightful and useful reviews these days. If you check out some of the Reddit threads associated with Donkey and his Yooka Laylee review, people are arguing how much you should allow his opinion to affect how much you want to get the game. Like literally, people have had a back and forth about whether or not Donkey is a good source of information, and someone made the argument that he's played loads of games, therefore you can trust his perspective. My perspective is that you're gonna want to wait for credible analysis to come out. If you really are gonna base your purchase on what someone says about the game in depth, wait. You can't just wait a day, you can't wait a week, you're gonna wait at least a month probably. Hell, it's taken me ages to get this video series out and I started day one of the release of Yooka Laylee. I think that the reviewers of YouTube are so oversaturated that it gives a lot of chance for people like Joseph Anderson and H-Bomberguy to rise. People who are probably pretty tired of watching 10 different reviews that say the same fucking thing.
It fails to achieve nearly everything it set out to do. Listen, when it comes to exploring and collecting stuff in games, that is my jam. I'm here, it's me, let's do this. Playtonic makes next to no effort to make any of it engaging or fun to explore. There was a lot to collect, but the act of collecting was a means to an end, not an activity solely unto itself. With so much to explore, and without the feeling of the designers meeting you halfway, collecting things in this collectathon throwback becomes a chore. How grating the voices are. 20 years later and you guys still can't make a working camera? Controls feel loose too. Moving about the world just never feels as tight as it should. It accelerates too quickly, it turns too wide, and is an absolute pain. I hated it. I personally found the music completely forgettable, just totally unmemorable. I mean, come on, you got Grant Kirkhope and David Wise, but this is certainly not an ugly game. But you know, I could squint my eyes and tilt my head and see how fellow Kickstarter disappointment Mighty No. 9 could have been a good game. Yooka Laylee is such a bloated, sloppy, frustrating, and ultimately boring mess. I cannot see how this could have ever lived up to its forebearers. Just want to grab Playtonic and shake them and say, I don't care about your insecurities or whatever. I just want to play your game. I want to enjoy myself. I want to be immersed in your world, but you just won't let me in.
It takes time to really tear a game down to its core and judge it objectively or as close to it as you can. Regardless of that, you have people who will play the game once or not even play it at all, and they'll say shit like this.
Because the developers are not really skilled enough to make the game that they wanted to make. They bit off more than they can chew.
The development team simply weren't able to achieve their goals.
I'm sorry, Playtonic, but you failed.
Can you guys shut the fuck up about the developers failing? I am literally getting PTSD here.
Soma isn't really a horror game. It's not scary. Frictional was trying to make Soma a scary, tense experience, and they failed.
Look, all of you can't make that claim, so don't fucking embarrass yourselves. Playtonic delivered entirely upon what their promise was, and have stated that they will be supporting this game for a very long time free of charge to the backers. They've released their game and they've come through on each of their pledges while making it clear that they want to fix any and all issues that they can. This was a prime opportunity to have a real, interesting and flourishing consumer-developer relationship. and now we have a cavalcade of reviewers telling us how Playtonic have failed. Fuck off. Though I don't think they're actually going to have a major effect on this because Playtonic are actually pretty friendly anyway, despite these fucking people. So what was the conclusion from these guys about the game anyway?
If you're not sure about this game, just don't f***ing buy it.
And I'm sure there will be people that play it and enjoy it, and they're not wrong for enjoying it, but they're wrong for enjoying it.
They've got almost everything completely topsy-turvy in terms of what needed bringing up to date and what should have stayed exactly as it was 25 years ago. A critical error that really strips off the polish.
It's disappointing to see what Yooka Laylee turned out to be.
What it manages to faithfully recreate from the past is merely a facade that quickly shatters as you dig deeper into the game and stumble through its numerous faults.
I don't see any rational adult male, or female for that matter, who'd want to play this game.
What a mire of decrepit and rotten analysis rolled up into a clogged set of dishonest logical loops that only the brain dead can find informing. A fucking shambles. Well, thank God that's all we have to hear from them lot. Until the next time I make one of these series, right? So, in conclusion, Playtonic have completed the project they set out to do. They ran a highly respectable campaign to raise money to create a product that they figured many of us wanted, and though there were some bumps in the road,
wealthy blacks,
they pulled through regardless and created a genuinely fun and whimsical game filled with a series of mechanics that we're all very familiar with, combined with some new ones to experiment and combine with, giving a new world to approach and absorb with immersive visuals and music to really take us back to a time where we could enjoy a world for what it was, as opposed to reaching a particular area or beating a particular boss. The gameplay that we valued from these games was breaking down the puzzles in a logical manner and defeating the challenge within and finding the items in places that we would hide them ourselves if we were a developer, with extra sequences put on top to seal the game off and a simplistic childish story to help frame the entire thing. Yooka Laylee is not exceptional, but it is an awesome entry into the platforming collectathon genre that earns its side-by-side position with the greats. Fuck the controversial noise people have been making about this game. Also fuck my opinion of it. If you've gotten this far, then you've seen all of the most significant things this game has to offer and probably have come to a conclusion yourself, even if you haven't played the game. And with that comes the end of this series. If you enjoyed my set of videos, I would recommend checking out the last game I gave this treatment to, which was Resident Evil 7. If you'd like to see something even longer and even more complex, check out my 8-hour comparison of Soma vs Amnesia: The Dark Descent. And despite the length, it is the most referential and highly edited video I've ever put together. Hopefully my ardent hatred of other reviewers was a little bit more subdued in this series, but I mean, that series is a hell of a lot worse. Oh, and for those who have stuck around since the first dissection, I wanted to let you know that I actually checked out some more of Joseph Anderson's videos, the Inside review and the Witness review. Both are of excellent quality, and I actually really would recommend checking those out if you want to know what those games are about. Seriously, fantastic amounts of insight and research, which begs the question of what the fuck happened with Soma. And for those who are interested, I've set up a Patreon, which is now the proud owner of an entire sexy patron. Which, I mean, do I like read the names out for each video? Is that like a thing you guys would want me to do? I mean, the guy who is the patron, you know who you are since you probably are watching this video if you're a patron, so let me know if you want the name read out, because I know that's what a lot of people do. I also should mention that I actually throw updates on the Patreon, not ones that require you to pay or anything, literally just like a post or two here or there with pictures and just text to update you on what's going on in my projects in case you guys are actually curious. In addition, I'd like to thank Mr. Metal Commander, Mr. Richard Fortier, Mr. Emi, and Mr. Biometric for basically helping me proofwatch through these videos. It's always helpful because, once again, these things are a lot worse in their first form than they are in their last. As a side note, I would like to ask you folks what you thought of this series in terms of, let's say, improvements. I tried to structure it even more so in a way that made a little more sense, to be less rambly than the previous series. The intro slates are now shorter. I definitely made an effort to tone down the petty insults to other individual content creators, and I reduced segments to a 22 to 28 minute set in order to make it a little bit more bite-sized, though I think I went over with one of them. Let me know what you thought of the changes and whether or not you'd like to see anything in particular in the future, and I'll see what I can do. As for this series though, I bid you farewell, with the promise that I not only intend to tackle the Outlast series, meaning 1, Whistleblower, and 2, but I also want to check out the new Crash, God of War game, and, well, there's a whole bunch of others, and I can't and won't make a single promise about when these things may be released, nor how good they're gonna be, so regardless of all of that, I will see you next time, folks. Goodbye.